with another episode of Faces of COVID. 10 people, 10 places, 10 responses to the COVID-19 pandemic across the world. We have... We're better now. All right, we have Christina Dombrowski. We are going to talk to her now about how things have been and how the pandemic has kind of halted, but also created a whole new life for her abroad. Hello, Christina.
See if this will work. Okay, here we go.
Sorry I'm late. I appreciate
That's
you
okay.
waiting for me. You look fabulous. You always look so great.
Thank you. I tried. This is the most dressed. No. Come back. This is the most dressed I've gotten to work in months.
This is a great segue because, of course, I want to know about how everything has been since I've last talked to you. But can you start off with how work has been?
I was actually really lucky because the firm that I work for is in central London and we were already really pressed for space. So I was working from home one day a week anyway. So we all had like all the infrastructure and we all knew, here's how to work from home. We all had the resources. So it's all kind of messy now, to put it lightly, because now there are so many rules about who can travel and when you can travel and what you need to do. So it's a lot of people who they're doing research related to COVID, they're doing health research, lots of people with, like if you're doing research on comorbidities, they're really interested in having you. But you really have to prove that you meet this really high standard to be allowed in, because right now, no one from the EU, once you've been in an EU country, once you've been in the UK, once you've been in some other countries, you can't enter the US. But there's so much work that has to go in up front to show, hey, this person's doing diabetes research, so they really need to be in the US, diabetes, comorbidity for COVID, they're really gonna benefit the US, so please let them in.
I mean, one, you have an incredibly important job, allowing people to move to the US to have better lives or to make our lives here in the US better. And I want to talk about, how your job has been difficult because it is such an important job and there's all this red tape that has to come with it. So how has it been difficult and challenging when you're now fully remote? And now, if I understand correctly, you're quarantining.
It's kind of been frustrating because we're not all in the same place. So we'll get like the presidential proclamation and a lot of times we'll see it on Twitter. And because we're 5 hours ahead of the US, we'll see it on Twitter at like 11 and we won't know what's going on. And then it's 8 a.m. here, we're all logging on at 9, 4 a.m. in the US, what's going on? We're getting rumors. So that's been really, really frustrating. But it's the rumors and our job is totally impacted by what Trump says on Twitter. And for better or for worse, that's kind of scary.
People like to liken PM Boris Johnson to President Trump. They were both elected around the same time, same election cycles, and they're both very conservative. They're both head of conservative parties in their country. And Boris Johnson has had his own, well, you know what? I'll let you fill us in on how Boris Johnson has been during the pandemic, because people will, try to compare Trump to, other prime ministers around the world, but yet he still seems to get this reputation of being like the bad boy of, presidency. But I'm curious to know how the English people feel about Boris Johnson, who, like I said, gets often compared to as the British Trump.
He actually, at the beginning, he was kind of slow. I know that we didn't really go into an official lockdown until kind of after it had seemed like the US, some of the states were doing it. I think it was end of March. And he actually got COVID-19 fairly early on. And for a while, because of that, he was really on top of the science of it and saying, I've experienced this, I know what it's like, I want to make sure that we're not all dealing with this. The problem that we've had in the UK is that we've got England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. So a lot like the US has different states. There are a couple different governments who make decisions about public health. It's really bizarre, and the government's not been able to iron out all of these differences. And so while at the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were actually really kind of happy with how Boris was doing things, because he did actually listen to some of the science. He had the scientific advisory group. They all came out at press conferences. But now it feels like there's less of a coherent narrative around what we should be doing. It's pretty clear that the scientific group is saying we should have another lockdown, or we should do this, or we should close schools, or we should close universities, or people should work from home. And the government saying, well, work from home, but schools can stay open.
So can you speak a little bit about the culture of, the United Kingdom, England right now with this, mask wearing and all of the precautions that have been laid in front of them? Do you think that the English people very much take this seriously and want to help in whatever ways they can?
We're somewhere in the middle between some of these European countries and then the US, the really individualistic. Because on one hand, we're all paying into the NHS. So in some ways, we do want, at least I personally want to make sure that other people aren't getting sick and that they're not getting me sick. And I hope that they feel the same kind of collective, our health system, we're all in this together. So we want to make sure that we're all doing our bit. But I think there is a bit more individuality, or that sort of I do what I want streak, a little more than Europe, much less than the US. We've had many fewer protests about masks. As far as I've seen, people have been pretty good about them. I know that people do oftentimes just cover the mouth and not the nose, but they at least wear the mask. And everywhere in stores, on public transportation, mostly I've seen people doing it. I've not seen huge confrontations. There aren't these big, conspiracy, anti-mask things in the same way. It's not quite the same collective. And I think a big issue is as we've gotten further along, there's been more and more conflict within the UK. And that's really not helped. I think people feel like the government doesn't know what they're doing, so why should I wear a mask? Why should I socially distance? Why should I isolate for 14 days when I'm told to? We've had a lot of issues with the track and trace system. And I think that's caused a lot of people to go from this collectivist, we're all in this together, let's cheer for the NHS, they're our heroes, to I'm just done.
As we're now into month, we're way past half a year into this pandemic, with no end in sight into the new year. And we also have a lot of countries that are slowly, as leaders, starting to debate the science and the rules and not having a clear line of communication with their scientists. And that's causing a little bit of concern for a lot of people that, one, believe in the science, but also, worried that their leaders aren't taking this as seriously. And then what I think is the most important is that, especially here in the United States, we're in an election cycle, and it has become a politicized topic.
I don't know that I would say it's kind of the wedge issue in the way that Trump and Biden go at it. I think it's become more of our party, the Labor Party, for example, who aren't in power, are saying, well, we could handle COVID much better. We've got these economic ideas. We would support people who have to self-isolate. We would impose a new lockdown or these new measures, or we would increase airport testing. So they're kind of coming at it from a perspective of not that, Boris Johnson and his friends don't believe in the science. It's more they're disregarding it or they're handling it badly. One of the big issues that came out first was in the middle of England, a city, Leicester, had people who were really being treated horribly in garment factories. And that was just an incubator for the pandemic because they weren't able to work from home. They weren't making enough money. They had to go into work. They weren't necessarily able to access a lot of important services for health. And that was really, really awful. And so some of the politicization of it has kind of come in who's getting sick, who can afford to work from home. You know, if you can have a job that you can't work from home, and a lot of those jobs are things that aren't going to pay you well or don't have the same kind of benefits. Maybe you don't have quite as good access to going to the doctor, or you're living in a multi-family house, then you're at risk.
I'm curious, what has social life been? Have you been able to date? Have you been able to go out and, get a drink or go for a walk or run or go to a gym? What has personal life been for you? Especially, now that you're quarantining, I'm sure it's kind of limited, but before you had to self-quarantine, before you went to the United States, throughout the pandemic, how has your personal life been?
At the beginning of March, it was almost nothing. No gyms. You weren't supposed to leave your house except for like once or twice a day, very limited. I went for, I think, over 6 weeks without speaking to another person who wasn't a supermarket employee. You weren't allowed to go to other people's houses. You weren't allowed to meet them in public. You weren't allowed to really have any interaction beyond the people that you lived with, unless it was like a doctor or someone coming to do services in your apartment. So I was allowed to go to the supermarket and I could go for a walk. That was about it. I know that there's an end, whereas in March, no idea.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also kind of frustrating because I don't know what the UK is going to look like in 2 weeks, and whether when I come out of this, who I'm going to be allowed to see legally, and what weird rule will come into effect tomorrow.
With me, my reality was becoming so warped and out of focus. I was losing myself. I was losing who I was as a journalist, my abilities to perform, and a whole bunch of other things. So I'm curious, did it feel like you almost, lost yourself in this rabbit hole of questions and anxiety? Did you feel like you changed at all from the pandemic or at the beginning till now?
Now I'm much more, not skeptical of things, but I feel like I'm not as trusting when I hear something or read something. Like when I was going to the US, I don't think I believed until like the day that I got on the plane that it was actually all going to work. Because I was thinking, if there's an outbreak, where my family are, or if there's an issue, or if the UK government suddenly decides we're going to impose certain new restrictions, or if I get stuck somewhere, what happens if I get stuck somewhere? So I feel like I've gotten much more like, things aren't going to happen, things aren't going to happen, things aren't going to happen. And definitely when I was living alone and every day was kind of the same, wake up at 8:45, log on at 9, log off at 5:30, go for the same walk because there's only one real place I could walk, go to the same 2 stores because that was what was open. I feel like I almost lost a lot of time that was just filled with a spiral of, oh no, what if?
I think a lot of people, whoever's going to be watching this, will relate at some point to both the skepticism of who you're trusting or, how things are going to work logistically for you. They'll relate to the mental health strain. I am so curious, but also so terrified of the number of individuals that have either gotten sick mentally during COVID, but those that might not be here anymore because they were just drained mentally. I hope nonetheless that things get better for you. Just being able to go back and practice with rugby again. I know that that's a passion of yours. And, being able to, work in a capacity that is good for you. And I just hope that things look better for all of us, really.
Me too.
The collective sigh again.
Collective sigh. All right.
Well, you take care, all right?
You too.
All right.
Thank you.